India was ruled by a democratically elected party, the Congress Party, for about its first 4 decades, almost uninterrupted after independence. This was the party that took India to freedom, and its great moral authority took many decades to fritter away before people started voting for other parties. India now regularly has 24-party, multi-party coalition government of caste parties, language parties. There's a sort of efflorescence, a flowering of the lower orders moving into politics, grabbing things for themselves, being more corrupt than the upper castes, but delighting in it because they can, and they've never been able to before. If you took a McKinsey study approach to India, you wouldn't find this a very attractive prospect. The kleptocracy, the larceny, the corruption, particularly in northern India, is it's at times obscene. But if you take a sort of grand, a 30,000-foot view of India, then you see it in a much more majestic light. That this extraordinarily diverse country, that this amazingly, what's the word for it, easily fragmentable country, is settling its differences every day, peacefully, through civic negotiation, through the ballot box, through freedom of expression, through things that we take for granted in the West, but which took centuries in the West to acquire, and which most of the developing world, China particularly, have not yet had a taste of. That India could do this, starting from such a low base, from an economy where 90% of people lived in villages, as opposed to about 2/3 now, and where almost 90% were illiterate, as opposed to about 1/3 illiteracy now, is an extraordinary and again underappreciated accomplishment. But that it can do it with 8, 9, 10% rates of economic growth is something nobody really foresaw. When India got independence, it was fashionable for American scholars, diplomats, British scholars, diplomats, thinkers and journalists to predict the country would last about 10 years. That it's just too diverse, too contradictory. That if it did survive, it could only survive as an autocracy. The military would take over. India has not had one day of military rule in its 63 years of existence, and it's had 19 months of autocracy. And those in the mid-1970s under Indira Gandhi, known as the emergency period. What has changed in the last 15, 20 years is that it's moved from one-party rule, not one-party democracy, but a democracy where one party kept winning, to this just complete proliferation of parties, lower caste parties, that are able to rule India and keep it stable. And these really deeply entrenched, bitter social divisions are by and large being resolved peacefully. And not only that, being resolved without actually upsetting the economic growth story.